far so good, but also so far so low. We've had a series of single, solitary, solo speakers, but as David has indicated, that is about to change now with a bit more joint thinking about how all of this translates into everyday practicalities and practice. We're going to do it by pooling expertise. In the first of these two sessions, we're going to call for reasons that I hope will become obvious showcase interviews and picking up on some of the things David has set up. So can you please jointly welcome to the stage Dr. Ghada Zoubiane, Programme Manager for Antimicrobial Resistance at the Medical Research Council in the UK and Deputy Chair of JPI-AMR, the Joint Programming Initiative on Antimicrobial Resistance. There are far more seats than there are people, so choose wisely. Kathrine Angell-Hansen, Head of the Secretariat for the Joint Programming Initiative, Healthy and Productive Seas and Oceans. And Dr. Piotr Swiatek from the Joint Action Working Group of the Strategic Energy Technology Plan. So I'm going to get into individual details, but let's just start with something. You've all got joint somewhere in your title, so I take it you believe in the power of combining. How do you get that to work effectively so it's not just a coming together of people, but you actually have, you know, who all get along amiably and it's all very lovely and you share common stories, but how do you actually make sure you have improved impact in that way?
The SAT plan, which is Strategic Energy Technology Plan, was actually, you know, on the forefront of energy policy in Europe since 2007, so it's an institution. And involving the member states is one of the main tasks and aligning them. And of course, it's very difficult to deal with 28 member states. And this is a complicated process. That's why that Joint Action Working Group has been established. It's a sort of a variable geometry that allows people that at the moment have a relevant input, interest, can be effectively put into the system that tries to generate bilateral, trilateral cooperation, IRANETs, and so on. And it works very good.
Yes, there's no word for 28 lateral, is there? And just for anybody who's not fluent in Euro policy jargon speak, how does a joint action working group differ from a joint programming initiative, just in case anybody needs any clarification on that?
Because the Joint Action Working Group is a body. It's a body, I would say, for the designing the incentives a right level. Not very high political level, but on the right operational level, gathering actually the decision makers from the ministries that can more or less on spot decide what can be done together, where is the common interest. And that generates secondary activities like IRANETs, for instance.
Okay, now, you've now been re-enfranchised.
You can hear me. Well, for those who don't actually know much about antimicrobial resistance, it is actually the microorganism that we have that become resistant to treatment. And latest study and research have shown that if we don't do anything about it, by 2050, 10 million people will die from AMR. So we are basically running out of time here.
So that's one of those clocks that's only going in one direction again.
It is going very much. Any one of us who will need any sort of treatment that will require antibiotics, we will be affected, whether we're cutting our finger, removing our tooth, or delivering a baby, hip replacement, or others. So it is a pressing issue. And the only way to tackle it is to join forces. It is beyond biomedical sciences. It's not only biomedical sciences. It's the fact that we need to understand that it's a societal issue that involves everybody, from those who understand behavioral science to dealing with animal, because antibiotics is an issue for animal husbandry, the environmental sciences, as well as innovation and biomedical and new drugs and new diagnostics. So it's a complex issue, and in order to tackle that complex issue, we do need to join forces not only within Europe, but even beyond. And this is where the Joint Programming Initiative on Antimicrobial Resistance comes to place, because it's looking at that problem it's allowing a platform for those people who are interested and willing to do something about it to either fund excellent research, but as well to reach out to the policymaker and the end user and make sure whatever we support have an impact to the common person who will be going to hospital or who would need antibiotics. So I'd say Europe, but I'll say as well global. Infection has no boundary. We do not microorganisms do not need a visa. They just travel wherever we go. And with ease of movement between countries, we do have that problem being really exasperated.
In fact, a conference like this is a great way for them to spread. We all come together and share our...
Exactly. Exactly. So most of you hopefully will not go with some resistant bacteria or viruses home, but you may. So reaching out beyond Europe is crucial when we talk about AMR, and that's why the JPI AMR was one of the first who has members such as Japan, Argentina, and Canada on board, because we do believe that there is a lot of excellent knowledge globally that we can build on and move things forward.
Okay, and just briefly, because we haven't heard from Kathrine yet,
Sure.
but what the original question asked, what have you learnt from doing this in practical terms about how to work collectively, effectively?
Well, working collectively is as complex as the problem itself, because you need to be sitting at the table willing to give away what you actually have been fighting for all your life in your own country or in your own comfort zone. Sitting and talking to a biomedical scientist and telling them that working in actually behavioral science could be a challenge for them. So it's stretching the boundary, stretching the knowledge, and making sure that actually you are willing to integrate what you think. And I think integration, that's the issue. It's not only two people sitting at the table, it's actually bringing things together, and the outcome will be different from what you originally wanted, each one of you separately.
Kathrine Angell-Hansen, how different is it for you? Because when you talk about antimicrobial resistance, there is a problem, microbial resistance, we're trying to find out ways to tackle it. When you talk about oceans, well, that's a multitude of different things you're dealing with in your JPI.
And thank you, that is very spot on, because the challenge of ocean is precisely that we are not tackling the oceans in an integrated manner. So we have a deficit in the say of coordinating governance on the at the political levels as to oceans. It's working partly, not least due to the European Maritime Policy, where there was a high recognition of the fact, and where 11 DGs sat together and agreed on how to look at the cumulative pressures on the oceans. And I'll give a little compelling example on it. If you're dealing with fisheries, there are areas not very close to this border where you can't eat fish today. There's areas in the Mediterranean where you're not even allowed to fish. And that is because of combined pressures. But the politicians who are managing under the common fishery policy, they don't know if that is subject to pollution, if it is impact from climate change, and in case what sort of pollutions, or whether the changes in the fish stock is due to poor management, or if it's a change in a tipping point in the environment. So it's only through an integrated approach we can solve those issues. That is why, to reflect also what Piotr said, it's important to have a policy framework to work with, and then to combine that with a top-down, with a bottom-up approach.
But you've also got to presumably take account of all the divergence as well. You can't, there's no such thing as an average European sea. There's, you cannot treat the Baltic and the Med and the North Sea as all the same. You've got to reflect those differences as well as taking everybody on board to do so.
That's also totally right. So at the moment what we're doing is, as we know, every second breath you breathe in this room comes from the oceans, from the algae producing it. So we need to understand what is the global issues and how it impacts local. But we're at the moment at a situation where we have some understanding of the global climate changes and how they impact on the oceans, and how the oceans in turn provides a service to the globe and all living organisms. We have some understanding of the pollutants, the pressures caused by humans. But we're not at all at a level where we're able to decouple that and to downscale it to the regional levels. And that's what we have to do in order to serve the policy needs of those who are going to do the planning for the future, and also for industry, so that they know when they're making an investment in a 40 years perspective, that their framework conditions when they move into the oceans is going to be stable.
But there's a balance here for all, the question for all three of you, between looking to the future, and obviously that's part of what JPIs and joint work action groups are for. We're looking to the future, but it's also about making differences now? Have you done much that your average European citizen, your average European taxpayer is going to be able to say, we did that, we have changed that? Piotr?
Well, in the case of energy policy, energy activity, is quite simple, because theme number one in the integrated roadmap for set plan is the consumer, consumer-oriented policy, both in case of information and both in the sense of engagement. So the policy in the case of set plan is fulfilled through the Horizon 2020, and we have dedicated activities for that in our energy efficiency, interaction with the end users, consumers in variety, coming from car sharing to proper behavior at home to save the energy. So in that sense, in energy, the plain citizen of Europe should feel our activities directly.
Ghada?
I think there are quite a few aspects here that I want to touch upon. There's the fact that we as JPI-AMR have a stakeholder group, and these are very much engaged with what we are doing in terms of the research that we want to fund. They're representative of patients, but as well as charity, industry, and other stakeholder and end users. And this is a focused group. But in addition to that, there is the fact that through JPI-AMR, countries such as Argentina, for example, or some of the European countries, where AMR was not on their political agenda, what the JPI-AMR... Yes, actually they have other problems, right. Economical problem and others that probably are more of priorities. Even in Europe, you find a really differences between how AMR is tackled. And JPI-AMR was a very moving and pushing and encouraging force for such actually country to think about it. And I think that's a good starting point. You need to acknowledge the problem. If you do not acknowledge the problem, then you're not actually going to do anything about it. And this is a good starting point. Argentina was very keen because of that, because of the way the Joint Programming Initiative is working together. They were very impressed, and they really volunteered to want to come on the table. The same thing for Japan. I think we take it for granted that what we consider in Europe is like the rest of the world is quite acknowledging the problem. I think having one force, one voice within the European country has made it easier for us to raise the profile of AMR within the community and the countries. And this is something currently is happening.
Do you think it's important, though, that people are aware of what you're doing? It's good. The most important thing is obviously to do good.
Yes.
But, you know, I don't know how many people here are familiar with the Marvel universe of Spider-Man and Thor and Iron Man. Just bear with me, you'll see where I'm going, I hope. But I've got a 5-year-old, so I'm acutely aware of it. And, you know, we were talking the other day about something, and I was thinking, well, actually, you know, the JPIs are the kind of European research equivalent of the Avengers. You know, the coming together of groups that are powerful in their own way to tackle the world's greatest problems. And yet, you say JPI to most people, and they've never heard of them. Is it important that there is greater awareness, because that will then help with greater citizen engagement?
I think awareness of antimicrobial resistance is a challenge. We've done a review in the UK, and Wellcome Trust has done it, and they found that actually the common person who goes to the GP expecting antibiotics to be prescribed to him do not understand actually what antimicrobial resistance is. So there is a big aspect of actually educating the public, educating the patient, of course, the doctors too. So you have a lot of variety, even within the UK, which we're very proud that everything is by prescription, but the way we actually prescribe. And this is on a smaller scale within the UK, so you can imagine it on AMR. I don't expect people to know about AMR, but there is a political momentum at the moment, and there are politicians such as our Prime Minister in the UK, such as Barack Obama, they are raising that profile, and it's slowly filtering, but it does take a little bit of time. And as such, JPI need to do more to actually highlight where they add value to what's happening. It's a very busy landscape at the moment with AMR. Everybody from the United Nations, WHO, to all sorts of big players. And unless actually JPI just actually find the right way to be there with the rest of the player, it is going to be a challenge.
Good, your answer lasted just long enough for Kathrine to get a gulp of water before I asked her a question. Is it the same picture for JPI Oceans? Because a lot of what you're doing, if it works, the benefits are going to be not in just a couple of years or a couple of months, but in a couple of decades' time. So how do you get that connection with the average person?
Yeah, and I think that is, that's also a very good question. to me, to answer the first thing, it's not important to me that the public at large knows what JPI Oceans is about. I mean, it's not about that. But what is a really serious issue to us is ocean literacy. Because we haven't even cracked the communication code in the waters. We can't observe the waters. And so we've used it as a dumping place, for instance, for ages. And the ocean literacy, how we're actually dealing with something which is fundamentally important to the survival of life on this planet, which we happen to live on, is radically a big problem. I'd like to give one example. It's not...
Good, that's what we're here for, examples.
Yeah.
We want
so
examples.
The whole thing is, we know from the fisheries example I gave that if we don't do something today, we'll have a serious, much more serious problem in some decades ahead. Our strategic advisory board said if we don't do something, we will not be able to have fish in the water in the future. We'll only eat algae. That is a serious government failure if that's what we're giving our next coming generations. So our example, microplastic, was driven by the members of the ministries. They looked at it, said, how big is this? We had a panel, we did a bibliometric study to see how big is it, tested new tools, did a foresight, and realized that this was much bigger than we had expected. Launched a call, fantastic. Within the last month, 3 countries added to it were 11. It was Portugal, Spain, Italy, boosted up with a lot of money. And we have 4 massive, huge, important projects going, and it's driven because of the JPIs, because we work politically, because we have the ministries at the table and need the ministries at the table. Germany succeeded at tabling that at the G7, and it was 1 out of 4 actions in the G7 declarations from science ministers. The other one was the other pilot action we have on the deep sea, which I'd also be happy to say something about. But the point is, from that, in parallel, the Ministry of Research in Germany asked, how do we do something about literacy on this? They, by the way, also took it in the Carnegie Group, which Robert Jan Smits can confirm earlier this month. So they're driving it up the political agenda, and coupling it with that, they're running now a big campaign planning on debris in the oceans with museums to raise awareness of what we're doing. And to me, that is how we can make the impact. It's putting science at the table of society and explaining in the knowledge economy what services we can provide to society.
Yes, science not as something that can help society, science as part of society.
And that's the whole thing. The JPIs is era, yes, but it's not only area, we're responding to challenges. And that is why I stressed when we started, we need to have ministries at the table, not only those who fund them, like the funding agencies and the ministries responsible for research, but those who are also going to develop the policies of the future. The aim of our JPI management board is maybe we can have some regulation in the future on the use of plastic, and we know also there are other opportunities we can use than the plastics we have today.
Well, that kind of brings us back to a point that David Wilson said in a very diplomatic way. He talked about joint programming being a promising tool but not reaching full potential, which I thought was beautifully phrased. If we are talking about next steps, if we are talking about making a difference, how do you get joint programming, and I'm including joint working action groups in that as well, how do you get it to be more effective and actually be able to actually make more of a difference more rapidly? And we'll start with you, Piotr.
Well, we are talking about aligning the national funding. And the big problem is that they have different timescales and different volumes. And of course, to make the common incentives under such a varying conditions is quite difficult. So it simply needs flexibility and better communication.
That's easy to say.
Yes, but that communication is then effective when it's provided on a certain level, which is relevant for decision making, and then between the stakeholders who are really engaged. And for me, what was very interesting that two new incentives announced in Paris, because I checked, there are 7 European countries in that mission innovation that declared the double this expenditure for energy R&D. But then the Zuckerberg and co, with their breakthrough energy coalition, they said they will only invest in the countries that joined that invention mission, so mission in innovation. So it means that
that's a major endorsement for that way of working.
Yeah, so it's absolutely an endorsement. So it means that that in engagement of the member states, it's somehow very recognized in that sense. And such a measures we need to boost the cooperation between the member states.
Got it.
I think it really depends who's on the table. And what we found that, yes, we have had a lot of research council and funding bodies and on the table, but now it's crucial to engage with the ministries. And I think we started that at an intergovernmental workshop that was run in Paris, and that was really very useful. Just to be able, when we're talking about communication, communication is easy said than done, but it was very interesting to see the different views around the table and raising the profile of what we are doing. I think it's really crucial. Engaging with the policymaker, not only to know what research actually to fund, but what the research outcome can feed into the policy. Because there's a lot of information that's already out there, it's just it's not being translated either into policies or into drugs and innovation. So I think there is a gap here to fill, and this is the gap that in the next few years we're tackling as JPI.
I noticed on your website it says that JPIMR cannot address all aspects of the antimicrobial resistance problem. Is that something you're happy with?
That of course. I mean, JPI-AMR is not there to solve all the problem. It's a platform where all the players can come together. I think it will be foolish to think that only through a handful or 20, 25 people can solve that global issue. But I think if you find a way to do it by bringing those people together, by having a platform, by facilitating research and increasing resource use, I think that's the way forward.
As long as you don't have a series of groups with each of them thinking it's somebody else's responsibility to do that.
And that's exactly why linking with other ministries, it will make it everybody's problem, rather than the JPI problem.
Oh, Piotr, briefly, I was going to bring Kathrine, but we'll come to you in a second, yep. No, that was me saying yes to you. I think you stuck your hand up.
It just something came to my mind, because, of course...
That's the way this is meant to work. That's good.
To work, yes. Because we are talking about bringing right stakeholders to the table. And the situation in the member states in Europe is very different. We have many intermediate organizations. No. And we are talking about the member states. Now we started to talk about the regions, especially because they are autonomous with their structural funds. But in many countries, the founding organizations are fully autonomous.
Yeah.
And I think it has been not taken into account. We have the TAFTI, which is the platform of the innovation organization, which is actually founding organization for innovation in Europe. So this I would like to see as an example that we still have look around whom else we could involve in that process. Yeah.
Finally, Kathrine, last word on behalf of everybody.
Yes. That was challenging. No pressure at all. I'd like to start by what you said, because if all we wanted to do is to increase the fundings for research in Europe, I would say we don't need the JPI. So I would really advise everyone to increase Horizon 2020 and the next framework program. So what we did was we tried to go out and look from the bottom up, top-down approach written in the Lund Declaration, where and how can the JPI oceans add value in the ERA landscape? What do we need to do? How can we make Europe more efficient? How can we make it more competitive in a global environment? So we looked for new tools, and to us the biggest challenge we are facing is that out of the 2 billion euros the member states and associated countries spend on oceans research annually, half of that is data gathering for policy and for infrastructures for science to support these policies and for their scientific endeavors. So if we don't manage to bring into articulations corporations on activities like that, we don't succeed. We've tested it in a pilot project now, which is run for a year, run by the Netherlands, where we try to respond to two policies, one with the competence of the member states, one at the competence of the Commission, so very complicated, 9 countries sharing of the data, and that exercise is being now tested to see, are we able to scale this up, and do we get the cost benefits out of it as we hope? So to us, that is a very important way of working, because we see ministries today who say they spend more than half their budget on science to support, and rather than excellence in science, because they need it to respond to the policy challenges they have. So to me, that is a very important element to bring also into the discussions. You know, that alignment, as was written in Lund, is more than just putting fresh money on the table. We're also, as Piotr is saying, it's true, and we will never be able to have all the innovation systems in Europe be the same. When I was working in Tafti, formerly years ago, I made one very clear conclusion, and that was there's only one similarity in Europe, and that is that the innovation systems are different. And but you know, that is not even something to laugh at, because that's the beauty of the European Union, is that they're exchanging practices. It's the same way Europe is working. It's exchange of practice. It's a dynamism. What we have to do is to be advantageous in seeking to try out new solutions. We're testing cash in kind, we test the North Sea action, we're testing, we're learning, we have to be learning initiatives.
And to harness the value of those differences, not to let it slow us down.
And it's like the commissioner said, you know, to test new things. The moment we're decided we've found the solution, we're lost. That's the start of the failure. So we have to be daring, learning, and that's what, as I could say from all my colleagues in the JPI, that's the way we're working. We're discussing in the corridors, we're meeting to see how are you doing that? Have you had that problem? I mean, that is how the JPIs have to work.
I would love to go on another half hour, because every 5 minutes you're getting warmer and warmer and more passionate and more passionate about this. But we'll have to leave it there. Can we please thank our showcase panel one more time? Kathrine Angell-Hansen, Piotr Swiatek, and Ghada Zoubiane. Thank you. And I know I didn't go to you for questions there, but there will be time for questions in our next panel, which is coming right up in a moment. But this being a conference that's all about taking stock, it's important we stop for some stock taking every now and again. And we're going to have a look at what we've done today and what useful conclusions feed into where we're going with the 2015 Lund Declaration. Christian Naczinsky is from Austria's Ministry for Science, Research and Economy. He has kindly agreed to pop up a couple of times over the course of today and do the impossible of trying to sum up everything in 5 minutes or less. Christian, the floor is yours.
Right, thank you very much.
We'll get some applause for you, I think would be good.
We are already behind the schedule, so please no more applause for me today. Of course, it's an impossible job that I have to do here, and I apologize in advance if I fail to summarize and link everything up to the declaration, as this is my task here. When I listened to the very interesting debate and discussion here, I summarized to myself that the debate was around the why and the how. The why, and I will start with that, is why these 3 showcases have been presented and what is the real issue behind that. And we heard from the speakers here that, for example, it's very clear that if we don't do something about the antimicrobial resistance, of course there's a danger that millions of people might die in a couple of years from now. So there's a clock ticking. So and it's not about grand challenges or not grand challenges, it's about societal challenges, and society expects science to contribute to solutions. So therefore, it directly leads us to the aspect of impact. And it was also given an example from the area of the oceans, JPI. There is this danger that we don't have fish in the water for the next generation. So we really have to do something now if we want to safeguard that the ocean will be there for the next generation in a meaningful way. Now, in doing that and in trying to achieve that level of impact, of course, it's clear that we have to involve stakeholders that are currently not so much part of our, let's say, universe, also here in this room. So we have to reach out to ministries, it was said, beyond and outside the world of research and innovation. We have to involve end users, and we were given some examples how this is already working today, but we have to strengthen that. We have to strengthen the interface between stakeholders from research with those outside the academic world. And of course, we also have to involve more the public sector, the industry, and end user organizations. So coming from that sort of why, it also expands to this global dimension that was also, I think, touched upon by our colleague in the field of the JPI on antimicrobial resistance. Because, of course, infections have no borders, it was said, they don't need any passports. So, of course, it's clear that it's important to bring in partners from around the world, and that includes the advanced countries, but also the emerging and developing countries. And in doing that, of course, and that is something that perhaps was not so much mentioned during this debate, but it somehow is an underlying current, is we have to bring in the best researchers possible from all these corners so that they can contribute to the best possible solutions. And also for that, we need to have a system in place in all of our countries that foster excellence and excellent research. Now, this is already a part of the how, so we need to do the best possible research, and we need to have the instruments in place so that we can achieve that. And that brought us back to one of the focus areas of the debate, I think. It was mentioned that what we need is a certain level of integration. We need to work together in a more streamlined, or now we say aligned way. But of course, at the same time, it was mentioned and stressed that we are all working in very different innovation systems, and that's also part of the strength of our European landscape. And we should not just give up the one, but at the same time work better together and strengthen the alignment. So it's very much about the right framework conditions. I think it is important that, and it was also mentioned, I think, from our colleague from the SET plan, that all those intermediary organizations that are very important, that they are responsible for spending a lot of money on research within their autonomous remit of responsibility, that we help them and work together with all these organizations so that the necessary structural changes that we need to a better level of alignment can be achieved. And it was just at the very beginning, and that will be my final remark at this stage, that it was said that we need more and clear political support also in that. So of course this is something where and that is a bit of the challenge here, that we have to get a top-down support and a kind of a political mandate. And it was given the example of the G7. But it also, of course, has to do with the Council of Ministers in Brussels. So that we get this top-down support, but also then work bottom-up through all the different stakeholders, through the funding organizations, agencies, and of course, not the least, through the researchers who do excellent research. So this is, Quentin, my summary for the moment. Thank you very much.